It would seem as though.
Hi, hello, it's me. Oh my god, and I'm being shot to death by my least favorite character in all the MCU, Tony fucking Stark.
I don't actually know anything about Iron Man.
He's the worst. Here's what I'll tell you.
He's a billionaire who makes it. But before we get into any of that, welcome to another episode of It Would Seem As Though, the podcast where we talk about anything, everything, and nothing.
Mostly nothing.
Mm-hmm. I'm Vesta.
I'm Annika.
And I
hate you.
am Iron Man.
Here's a little blurb. Iron Man is the worst person.
I guess I'd be Iron Woman.
Iron Thug. Anyway.
Or I'm an old lady with an Iron Man gauntlet that came from Disneyland like 7 years ago.
You know,
that amazingly enough, the batteries still work.
That's crazy to me. Oh my god.
All right, I'll stop now.
But Iron Man was, Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., love Robert, but Iron Man was like an arms dealer, made weapons, sold it to warmongers, and then was just like a pretentious asshole through the whole thing. And I have like this whole thing I wrote about how much I hate Tony Stark. And people are like, but he changed. I was like, his redemption wasn't good enough for me. I don't care. He did more.
His redemption arc was not an arc at all.
He did more damage and was an asshole more than he did good, so I don't give a shit.
All right. Fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, see, in these, that's more than I already know because I've never seen a single Iron Man movie.
Well, just agree with me. It's fine.
Of course. I mean, who else am I going to agree with? If I had to agree with someone blindly, it would be you.
Yes.
I mean,
same.
because we are virtually the same person.
Yes, same, honestly.
You're just younger and thinner and taller. And,
well,
you know.
it happens.
Other than that. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the week that we've had, or that I've had. You can talk about your week, too. I mean, you know. But... So last week, and I think I talked about it a little bit, I'm not even sure, because it's been a week. Last Tuesday, because we're now recording on Tuesday, and when I remember to do it properly, it's still released on Wednesday. But some days, you know, she's old and she doesn't remember. And so I just immediately released it. It's like, okay, well, it's supposed to be tomorrow, but blah, blah. But last week when we recorded, we were dealing with a very sick dog. My old poodle, standard poodle. Yeah. Not a tiny poodle. I don't like little poodles. They're too yappy.
Yeah, I agree.
But my standard poodle had started to fail. He, a couple weeks ago, started walking funny. And then he started having trouble walking at all. And then towards the end, he couldn't stand.
Right.
And so we made the horrible decision to have him euthanized, which is always awful and horrible. And my prayer always with an animal is that they're just going to go in their sleep. That they're going to be like, I'm having a really rough day. I'm going to bed. I'm not waking up.
Yep.
And that did not happen. And so on the next day, after our pod, I had an appointment at 3:30 at the vet. Well, and he had somehow been very stoic through the whole thing. He hadn't been crying or whining. So I assumed he wasn't in a lot of pain. Yeah. But Wednesday morning, he just cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. And I was like, oh, God. So I called the vet and I said, you know, is there any way we can come in earlier? Because I don't think I can make it till 3:30 in the afternoon, knowing he's in that much pain. Yeah. And they were like, we don't have anything. But when the doctor gets here, we'll call you back in case there's something. And fortunately, they called back and said 10 a.m., and so we went as a whole family and took him in, and the kids sat with him, and T sat with him, and on the floor of the exam room. And they were so sweet, the people. They explained everything, and I hadn't seen this before, but they gave him a sedative first. Yeah. Just to make him fall asleep. But she said, but he'll still be able to hear you. He won't be able to move or do anything, but he'll hear you. Yeah. And so if you want to talk to him, yeah, it was hard. And it was also kind of funny because as soon as she gave him the sedative, his tongue fell out of his mouth. Yeah. So he's just laying there with his tongue just like on the floor. And T reached over and pushed his tongue back into his mouth and closed his mouth. Sweet I was boy. Like, well, Yeah. But yeah, and so that was particularly hard because he has been my son's companion since he was 1.
Yeah.
And he is now 12.
Wait, since TT was 1?
Since Parker was 1.
Parker was 1, yeah.
Othello was 6 months old when we got him.
Yeah.
So, and he instantly bonded to that little boy.
Yeah.
And, yeah. So, that was a very, very unfun part of our week. And so, there's been a lot of sadness and grief and crying and...
Yeah, well, and like you said, that you hope that... your hope with animals is that they'll just go night-night and then, then over the rainbow bridge, no more waking up and in pain. Makes me think in 2020, at the very end of 2020, we had a cat who was almost a 20-year-old cat who had lived a life, and he was a big old Burmese, so he was big and fluffy and beautiful. But he just got older and sick, and we made the appointment on New Year's Eve of 2020, or for New Year's Eve. And then that morning, we were getting ready to go take him, and we went downstairs and he had to go get him, and he had already passed, like a couple hours prior. And I was like, this is gut-wrenching, but I am grateful he chose on his own.
Yeah.
And like maybe, animals are very intuitive. They're very sensitive. So maybe he already knew. Yeah. Maybe he knew it was time.
It was time.
Didn't make it any easier, but
what's hard for me is when you have to make that choice. Mm-hmm. It's always, am I making the right choice?
Yes.
And that, because like when we had to do the same thing with our old black lab, Willie.
Yeah, Willie.
He was so sick. Yeah. And his last day on Earth, he literally couldn't hardly walk, and he couldn't breathe, and he was just like, I came home and he was lying on the floor, panting in a pool of blood. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
The doctor said you'll know when it's time, and it's clearly time.
Yeah.
And so we put him in the back seat of the car, and his 3 favorite things in the entire world were me, treats, car rides. Mm-hmm. So we put him in the back of the car, and I sat back there with him, and I fed him treats the entire way there. He was just as happy and chipper as a puppy, and I was like, oh no, turn the car around. What are we doing? He's fine. And of course, in my brain, I know he's not fine.
Yeah.
He's just chipper at that moment because like all his best things are happening.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, because I know you were there because you went with us. I was fine.
Yeah.
Up until my husband started talking to the dog. And he's like thanking him for being such a good dog. I'm out. Because then I started bawling.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to go bawl outside. Because, it was just too much for me. And kind of with this one, I've been very like, I know this needs to happen. I've been sad, but I hadn't cried. And the moment we got into the veterinarian's office and saw the blanket on the floor, I was like, that was that. Mm-hmm. I started bawling. And I found for me, this one was a little harder just because it affected my children so deeply.
Yeah.
Because, they've all affected me and made me cry.
Sure.
But this one is like, and this one hurts my babies. Mm-hmm. And so it's just a little bit extra, So, and I was telling you that I just read this morning a thing about why grieving a pet is sometimes so hard, because pets love you deeply and unconditionally.
Yep.
And they accept you for exactly who you are.
Yep.
Which, how many people in life do that?
Right.
Right. It's like, as we were saying, they don't care if you're young or old or fat or thin or poor or whatever. They don't care.
No, they don't care if you failed, or you skipped your diet, or you started drinking again. They don't care about any of that. They just love you. You know what I mean? And that's like what I said prior to the podcast is that's why it's sad to me when people are mean to animals in general, full stop, because animals don't know. You know what I mean? Like, sure, if something's coming to attack you, sure, defend yourself. But like being mean to an animal for no reason or because you're frustrated, that animal doesn't know. You're just conditioning it to know that you're going to act that way, and that's upsetting to me.
Yeah.
But animals, unconditional,
So, we were planning on, the plan was that we would then wait a while to get another dog.
Yeah.
But my son was very, very, very sad, and was like, I need a dog to sleep with. He actually was laying in his bed crying, saying, I'm going to be so lonely. Who am I going to snuggle with now? He's my best friend. And then he said, he's my only friend. And I was like, well, we know he's not your only friend. So anyway, he was very, very sad. And we ended up finding a dog that I thought, well, his name was Quincy. He's very sweet. Doberman mix, but he looked like Doberman, like pure Doberman, but he was a little mix.
Love Dobermans.
On the website, it's like he's perfect, and they're not going to say that about most dogs because there's something, and they're like, he really is just perfect, sweet little man. And so I called and said, I'm interested in this dog, and she's like, I'm sorry to say that he has finally been adopted, and I was like, of course,
son of a bitch.
And then she said, but I have a lot of dogs here because it's called Best Friends Forever Shelter. And it's in Southern California, but it said that this Quincy was in Oregon City.
Wow, okay.
Being fostered there. I was like, okay.
Cute.
And I said, well, here's what we're looking for. We want a large breed dog. Has to be male because our little stupid pit bull, she doesn't like boys.
She wants to be the only
She wants to be the only girl. She's like, I can't be with other girls because what if they steal my spotlight? Mm-hmm. So she's a jealous little fathead.
Yeah.
And they have to be good with other dogs.
Yeah.
They have to be good with children. And so she's like, oh, I have several like that. And so she sends me names and pictures of all these dogs. And we decide on this one little pit mix named Jet. And we're like, cool. And they're like, well, we transport dogs up and down the West Coast every Saturday and Sunday. So they have somebody, because they're in Southern California, and they drive them all the way up.
Yeah.
And then they go back. Well, so we got it all arranged. They're going to pick up this new dog on Sunday, and cool beans. And then I get a text from the transport driver that says, here's a picture of your dog. We just loaded him up. And I go, that is not
the dog.
That is not my dog. That's a beautiful little pitty, but that is not my dog.
Yeah.
And so I texted her that. And then I thought, well, maybe she meant, because she has a van full of dogs.
Yeah.
And I said, I think maybe that message was for somebody else. And then the lady from the rescue calls me and is like, I'm sure you've already figured out what happened. I'm like, no. Not really, because I don't know anything about this. Well, the transport people accidentally picked up the wrong dog. And so she's like, maybe you could see your way to foster this boy so he doesn't have to ride all the way back to California, and then we'll bring your dog up next weekend. And it was like,
that sounds like a lot.
That is a lot. And I then talked to my husband, who's way more about animals than I do, and he says, to introduce our dogs to a new dog for just a week would be too much.
Yes.
And I was like, okay. And so I said, no, we're going to wait. Well, then she texts me on Sunday and says, call me. I said, okay. So I call her. I had just taken the kids to a cooking class. And we were going to go to Costco after the cooking class to get a dog bed to be prepared for next, because they were like, it'll be next weekend. Perfect. Well, while they're in cooking class, she says, call me. I call her and she's like, so here's what actually happened. Apparently, Jet had already been adopted and it hadn't been marked in the system yet, or the system hadn't, whatever, refreshed or updated or blah, blah, who cares. So this little guy is still on the truck. They're headed back from Seattle. If you are interested, you can have him. And so when I picked up the kids from cooking class, I was like, all right, here's the story. And he says, I want him. I was like, okay. So, we had a couple of hours to prepare for the fact that we were getting this little fat-headed pitty named Bruce. It was a little weird. I'm like, I have a brother named Bruce. It's going to be weird to have a dog named Bruce.
Mm-hmm. So I said, name him Brewski, and now we're frat boys. You know what I mean?
Right. So now we have a little fat-headed pitty named Bruce.
Yeah.
Although he doesn't seem to know his name, so I think we could call him anything.
Yeah.
Like Lil Fathead.
Lil Fathead. That's his rap
We decided his rap name right is Lil Fathead.
He's already wearing a chain, girl. He's into it.
I know. He's all about it.
He's such a sweet boy, though. He's just happy. He wants to love and play, and the other dogs are all, fuck off. I don't like you yet. You're young and happy, and we're old.
They're being very grumpy towards him. So I'm hoping they're going to snap out of it.
Yeah.
But he and the boy have already bonded. So So we have to make the other dog snap out of it because I'm not going to send him back.
Oh my God, no.
Besides, he was in a shelter for a year.
That's upsetting.
And one of the things that Rachel, the shelter lady, said to me was that black dogs are particularly hard to home. And I was like, why?
Okay, yeah, that's weird.
And she said, but black cats are too.
Yes.
I'm like, why?
Yeah,
what is wrong with people?
You know,
I would rather have a black cat.
You know, that's how I ended up with my big fat fatty, my big fat Nix over there, was because my good Judy Cece texted me, and she had a mama cat who had kittens, and they wasn't her mama cat. Someone was going to take all of them to Petco, and she said, no, bring them to my house, and I'll just foster them and then find homes. And so she was finding homes for all of them, and then there was a little black kitten, and she was like, people are mean, and I don't trust other people, and I have this black cat, I don't know what to do. And I said, girl, I know what you're doing, just bring the cat to my house, it's fine. So now I have this like almost 20-pound fucking panther of a cat, who doesn't, it's funny because, we also have those 2 kittens who are 6 months old, and Nix is a year this month, and she doesn't realize most of the time she's a cat. Like, she can't jump very high, she doesn't know she can climb things. Like, we used to let her outside on her leash. She doesn't understand that, like, she could get over that fence. She could climb a tree. She doesn't. She likes to roll in the dirt and on rocks. Like, she's a literal dog half the time. But it's cute. I love it, because those kittens are, like, on my shelves, knocking crystals and shit off, and she's just like, what are they doing? Like, I'm concerned.
Oh my God, who invited them?
Just love me. Yeah, so I do know that black cats, but I never imagined that black dogs would be a challenge,
I don't know.
too.
I don't know. And pitties, of course, are a challenge, because unless people are trying to get pits to fight dogs, which a lot of times shelters will see that people are trying to get pits, and they'll usually get the ones that are the like weaker demeanor, or like more passive, specifically so they can fight them. And it's like, you're horrible people, and I hope you die.
I hope literally every person who fights fucking animals dies.
Yeah.
If you died right now, good.
When T used to work at the Humane Society, there was a dog there. Oh my God, I fell in love with this dog. Little white pitty, and her name was Sugar.
Oh,
and Sugar had been taken from a Portland Trailblazer because he fought them.
Oh my God.
And I just wanted to take that dog home and hug and squeeze, but she couldn't be around cats. Yeah. And she couldn't be around other dogs, and she couldn't be around children because of how they had treated her. And
it was her trauma, girl.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what's now the kind of interesting note of that is my husband, answered the phone there at the Humane Society, and this lady called one day, and she goes, "It is such travesty that they have arrested that trailblazer because he didn't do it. He's innocent." And it's like, lady, we have his dogs here. He's not innocent.
No.
You
dumb bitch.
I mean, you probably like him because he's a sports guy and he's cute or whatever. Who knows? I don't know.
Who fucking cares?
But no, innocent? No. Not.
Well,
Monster.
There was that whole conversation.
Michael
Vick, exactly. I was just talking to Gavin about this the other day, and he said, if I could kill one person. And I said, same. Like, how dare you? And just intentionally so awful and violent and mean. Like, ugh. And doesn't make you, look, you want to do dumb shit like that, it doesn't make you more of a man. It doesn't make you cool or more masculine. It makes you a dumb fuck. Like, why would you do that? Why would you ever think that fighting animals together was a good idea?
My thought is, if you want to fight something, you fight. Go
fight
find some other man who's also equally stupid and fight to the death or whatever it is you're going to do.
Go fight a bear.
No one cares.
Go fight a bear.
Fight a bear.
Go fight a bear.
Like that.
Or a wild cat.
But you have to do it with your bare hands.
No
weapons.
Nope, none of them. But we'll see how tough you are then, bitch. Stupid ass idiots. Anyway, that makes me angry. And I know that we're not talking, our conversation isn't revolving around dogs and that kind of thing today.
But it is because tangents are topics and we talk about what we want.
Don't we, though? Don't we just? But there is something that I want to tie to grief in our topic. Our topic, because it is Black History Month, so we're talking about Black history and Black folk and Black power and all of it. But when we're talking about grief, I want to talk about transgenerational grief, okay? And so what that technically refers to is the situations where grief in an event was so powerful that within a family it's carried on to the next generation, and sometimes multiple generations thereafter. And we can think about slavery, right? Enslaved people living years, decades, their entire lives in a system that treated them as if they weren't human, all the things we know about slavery. And that is passed down. That's why when people say, like, well, slavery was so long ago, black people have it better now, blah, blah, blah. But bitch, do you not understand the trauma that went on? And, like, how that actually changes your DNA? And so there's this study, and the study is called epigenetics. And it is the study of how your behaviors and environment can cause changes that affect the way your genes work. It's not like a genetic change that's permanent, because it is reversible and it doesn't change your DNA sequence, but it changes how your body reads your DNA, right? And so there's a few different things that can do it, in like diet, physical activity, tobacco smoking, alcohol consumption, environmental pollution, psychological stress, physical stress. So all of those things are what can change how your body reads DNA, which then will change how your body functions. And so when people talk about like, oh, it wasn't that bad, or it's over now, or whatever, that's not necessarily the case for that person and for that person's life and their family. And like, so slavery, obviously, Holocaust survivors, indigenous people a lot of the time, most of the time, people who abandonment, parents who abandon children, parents who've lost children.
We wouldn't know anything about that.
No, I don't know what that is at all. But those are the, the things, major happenings in our world history.
Right.
Just a few, that have caused generational trauma. And so generational trauma and grief are the same thing, just different words. But it is more major than people actually account for. And anyone can have it. But yes, when you have been like stigmatized, or you've been marginalized, and your people have, and specifically your family has, that shit is passed down to you.
Oh yeah.
So you can you can get hypertension. There are specific diseases and conditions you can get from generational trauma.
Well, itself. I know that the higher ratio of diabetes in the black community is specifically because of the years of slavery and the way people were fed, the way they were treated, the way, all of the things, and it caused their bodies to hold on to that and for it to then be passed on. Yeah. So yes.
Well, and it's how people talk about like an STD as like the gift that keeps giving. Well, they talk about intergenerational trauma as the gift that keeps on taking and can be passed down to families.
Right.
So how exhausting, right? And how emotionally detrimental. And that's why a lot of people feel fatigued a lot of the time, especially if they had their own trauma or their parents had trauma or whatever, is like a chronic fatigue syndrome, because your body is...
Interesting.
Yeah, because your body is reading your DNA how it's not written, right? So it is interesting. It's like writing it out in Old English, but you can only read some words.
Oh,
Yeah. It is interesting.
Well, and I think about, because I know last week we talked a little bit about the influence of white folk on indigenous folk, and how especially, and I'm going to say very specifically, Christians, and how they went in and were like, well, your gods are fake and they're crap and you have to do our thing and blah, 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 and changed all of the way that they interacted with the world, thus changing their history, thus changing their traditions. And now the traditions and stuff, so many of them have been lost, that it is that there's a movement now, which I love, to go back and reclaim their history and their traditions and be like, give a big middle finger to the white population, saying, you tried to destroy us, and you did a pretty damn good job, but no.
Well, and so
we're taking it back.
I'm still in school, and currently I'm taking a class about women in the body. And I just watched this presentation of this indigenous scholar, and she was talking about the ways in which missionaries and Christians and Europeans came and how they changed everything. And even in today's standards, her whole thing was about less coupledom, like focusing on the kinship and like the system of family and how extended family was so important. And I think that this relates a lot, not just to indigenous people, but that was like their way of life. It wasn't just, oh, you got married, this was your nuclear family. That wasn't popularized until like the 19th century, right? Being a couple, having like 2.5 children, all of that bullshit that's all constructed. That's not the norm of the world, right? And so in like this woman, her last name is Tallbear. I don't remember what her first name is. I'm very sorry. But she was talking about, like, she is Dakota from the Northern Plains, which crosses from U.S. to Canada. And she was talking about how in her family, she remembers being a child and sitting at a table with 4 generations, with 5 generations, where people are laughing and eating and playing games and discussing tribal politics and nation politics. And how she is, like, considered mom to her sister's children, right? So everyone is, you know, your aunts and uncles are like a mother or a father to you.
Right.
Every elder is grandma or grandpa. And, like, so single mothers, and that's the big thing, is, like, there's white people and, like, the heteronormative ideal of, like, a mother and a father, and that's your family. And so there's the, oh, well, she's a single mother, or there's an absent father, or whatever the case may be. In indigenous tribes and in communities where there is a larger kin system, or people, even non-biological, no mother is single, right? Because she has a group of people. Right. She has a family to help. And so that really does go hand in hand with it. And, I mean, she goes into the human and non-human, meaning, like, the plants and and for her, because she's indigenous spirit, and she's not talking figuratively, she's talking literally, right? Also the animals and how we need to rebuild this, like, cohesion between all organisms, whether they are human or non-human, to create, because the world's being, she says, make kin, not babies, because people sometimes just have babies and have babies, and there's not that support group, there's not that outreach, there's not any of that. So I think that, I mean, when we think about the time of slavery, many of the enslaved peoples were not technically biologically related, right? But everyone helped, right? Everyone looked after the people who watched children. Children worked with people who were not their family.
Well, and considering how hard the white people worked to destroy black families, you know, it's like, oh, you had a baby that is now my property, I'm going to sell it. I'm sorry, I can't imagine somebody trying to take my child from me. I would somehow figure out a way to kill you.
I would burn it.
And I think about, I've heard people say, usually white people, well, why didn't they, rise up against the slave owners? No, why didn't they? Well, because they would have been killed.
Right. Well, and
they would have been, the people that they cared about would have been killed.
Yeah.
Or, and they were tortured, and it was like, whatever. So it's not as simple. I mean, it's not like you grab someone off the street who has rage and whatever in their heart, and then you're like, I'm going to torture you, and they're like, well, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
There was so much conditioning and so much threat and so much torture but it was like the idea that once they had a child, that child was just more of your property. It's like your dog had puppies and you can get rid of them. And it was like that idea of how hard the white people worked to destroy black families.
Yes.
And it made them stronger. That is crazy to me. That is amazing. But it's also amazing to me that, like, if you listen to church music, white,
different
Christian, snore. I'm
Boring.
sorry. It's all sounds like a fucking funeral dirge.
Look, girl, if I could listen to, like, ancient Latin people chanting in, like, a hollowed out church, I'm into it, because that is beautiful. But not modern day.
You listen to black gospel music that, was written at a time. So much of it was written at a time when what was there to be joyful about?
Right.
And it is joyful and celebratory. Whereas these white people who've known no real hardship, it's like, oh my God. It sounds like, play this at your funeral. And speaking of funerals, I was watching some show the other day. It doesn't matter what it was. At the end of it, when there was a funeral, it was a classic New Orleans funeral where it's like
there's the parade.
There's all the people, a parade, playing joyous music and walking down the street with their umbrellas and marching and joyful and happy, and it was like, that is amazing.
Well, and it's so Eurocentric for people to be afraid of death, right? Yes. It's a white people thing to be afraid of death and to think death is the end of everything. Where indigenous people of color, black folk, they celebrate it. And it doesn't end when that person dies. You have wakes, you have celebrations, you get together, there is community. And white people don't have that. White people don't do that. And that, to me, is weird, to be so fearful of death. And I think specifically in this household, it's a little weird because, I mean, I feel like death has surrounded our lives for a while.
Death has paid our bills.
Girl, and you know.
I mean, literally.
And Papa Man is,
Death pays my bills.
Girl, honest. And, like, you've experienced quite a bit of death. I've experienced quite a bit of death. And so it wasn't something for me. Yes, heartbreak and grief is real. But because from such a young age, like, I experienced so many people dying, it wasn't abnormal. And I didn't find it upsetting in the sense that it was, like, over, right? Because also being, like, a woo-woo girl, I'm like, no, they're still here. You know what I mean? Like, there's still their presence. We still remember them. We're still connected to these people. But a lot of,
I do believe for me that a lot of my sadness around death is actually tempered by that. By the feeling that, well, they've gone on to something. I don't believe in heaven. I'm going to be real clear about that. Heaven and hell to me are ridiculous constructs.
Yes.
Ridiculous. But I do believe that because we are energy, that once you leave this, human body that's just holding you down to the earth, that you return to energy.
Yes.
And whatever that means, and I think that I believe in reincarnation. I believe that you just return to the same system of energy that you came from. Well, and for some people, they leave a stronger, I think, footprint on the earth, where it's like their energy kind of lingers.
It's residual.
But if you think about how actual energy is, there are, like, electricity. There are traces of it that are left by things. Where it's like, this has been gone for a while, but there is still residual of that. I believe it's the same.
Well, and, like, here's an example, and this is about a white woman, but, like, Princess Diana, she died, and to this day, she's still, like, the people's princess. She's still, like, the favorite monarch that ever happened. Like, everyone loved Princess Diana, and she was real, and, like, the first monarch to ever touch an AIDS patient, like, big deal kind of things, and her energy is still alive, right? Granted, she has children and grandchildren, but she's still here.
As you know, I watched The Crown. Sadly, there's only one season left, but and it will be the season where they deal with the death of Princess Diana, which will be a big weeper season for me. But and because I remember where I was when I heard the news of her death, like people who are a little older than me say about JFK,
right?
But I also remember, because I have spent so many years in the queer community, I remember what a big effect it was for her to go to the hospital and to comfort AIDS patients. When all the other people were like, no, we can't touch these people. They're dying. They're contagious. They're queer. They're whatever. We can't be anywhere near them. And she was like, why?
I do what I want.
I do what I want. And the crown the monarchy did not want her going. But they also didn't want her to be so public. They didn't want her to be doing all the outreach that she did, because it was not dignified for her to be among all the commoners. And I was like, well, she wasn't born a princess. So before she was a princess, she was a preschool teacher.
I love that. That's so cute. I didn't know that.
Yeah, she worked in a preschool daycare situation.
One thing you were saying about energy is one of my biggest belief systems. And this is, that my belief system that you could consider spiritual is I have to marry that with science, right? I can't believe one or the other because they need to be married for it to make sense. I don't think that we can explain everything through science, and I don't think we can explain everything through religion or spirituality.
Oh, agreed.
And so when you said we're energy, one of the laws of thermodynamics is that energy can never be created or destroyed. It is just transferred. And so that is my belief when it comes to death, because think about it. Our bodies naturally run at almost 100 degrees, because why? Like, what is it? What kind of magic is in us that's keeping us going? Yes, I know we have heart and blood and all of the systems, but what keeps that moving? It's just energy. There's no reason. That's why if you don't eat, you know what I mean? You don't drink water, you don't take care of yourself, your energy starts to dissipate, right? Like, you're going to, when you die, you'll transfer out. And so I think that is important for people to remember, is that's why we have so many hardcore conservative religious people, because they don't believe in science, and scientists who don't believe in spirituality. Like, it needs to be combined. Yeah, it needs to overlap. You can't have one.
I know that I've had people who were more educated in science and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
talking to me about my beliefs and how basically my beliefs are crap.
Sure.
Because I have seen spirits over the years. I have felt them, seen them, talk. And, it's like if you don't believe, you're like, well, you're just crazy.
Yeah.
Well, you can't. Yes, probably.
Sure.
Probably crazy. But that's not what makes me crazy. And that thing isn't, it isn't wrong.
No.
It isn't. It does. It's like, just because you don't believe it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right.
Just because you can't prove it with some litmus test or some
right.
beaker in your lab doesn't mean it's not true.
Well, and that's why science is fallible, right? It's never ever stationary. Science is constantly evolving and learning, and that's why we learn more. And I think COVID was a really big example of that. We thought we knew what we knew, and it kept changing. And that's okay. And people said, well, see, science, blah, blah. No, that's how science works. Because you learn more information, and you adjust, and you retest, and you adjust. And, that is the whole point of it, right?
Right.
It's not to be like, this is fact, until there is something that can be replicated, and you keep getting the same answer.
Right.
Sure, then that's a scientific fact. But science, until it gets to, peer-reviewed, it's not necessarily stationary. It's not going to be concrete. There is an element of evolution.
And that's one of the things that the Christian folk who don't believe in science will use as they just disproved this, so obviously it's not real. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, it's always changing.
Yeah.
Because they're always trying to learn. They're always trying to go, oh, well, we haven't seen this before. What made that happen?
Right.
Yeah. And it isn't that, because they want you to say, well, God created everything, end of the story. No.
And that is such a rudimentary, ignorant thought. And it's funny to me, as if Christians want to point out science. First of all, girl, you probably failed high school biology, so don't give a fuck what you believe. But let's talk about the loopholes in your good old book, bitch. There are so many. Why is your God angry and then happy? I don't get it. Why is he drowning the world or killing all the first sons? And you want to talk about being pro-life, bitch?
Right.
Inaccurate.
Well, and then they'll say things like, well, that's the God of the Old Testament.
Uh-huh.
So it's a different God.
Oh, so it's different. Yeah.
So what you're saying is God had a little midlife crisis and decided to become nice.
Well, and here's the thing. Who's God's therapist?
Right. Well, considering he split himself into thirds to be...
Allegedly.
Whatever. But it's like, none of that makes sense to me. Mm-mm. Because, and I know we've talked about this before, but course. The idea of an omniscient being saying, you know what, I've been kind of an asshole. I've been mean. I'm going to be nice now. I'm going to forgive everyone. Because his son, who's really him, said, we need to save the people and forgive them all and whatever, and no longer have them sacrifice animals to you. We're going to just sacrifice me, and then it'll be done. One and done. And it was like, who came up with this nonsense? None of it makes any sense. But the idea that this being that's eternal, somewhere in the line goes, you know what? I've been around forever. I'm tired of being an angry God. I'm going to be mellow. I've smoked a whole lot of weed because somebody finally grew some.
Man.
And I was like, what is this? Oh, wait, I invented it, so of course I know.
Right.
But I didn't smoke it yet. Now I'm calm. I've mellowed out, so I know. And all of you who I don't know, anybody would be listening to us that would be mad about that. But it's like, if you think that's blasphemy, God created weed if you believe in God.
I'm a blaspheme to my heart, bitch. But listen, there's this quote by this philosopher, and his name was Epicurus. He was Greek, obviously. And there's a quote that I have always loved, and it talks about God specifically. And it says, if God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he is not omnipotent. If he is able but not willing, then he is malevolent. If he is both able and willing, then whence cometh evil? If he is neither able or willing, then why call him God? And I'm all...
That's deep, dude.
Love you. Thank you, sir. Yes.
Right? So say that all again.
Okay, so if God is willing to prevent evil but not able, then he is not omnipotent. If he is able but not willing, then he is malevolent. If he is both able and willing, then whence cometh evil? If he is neither able nor willing, then why call him God?
That is so deep. I love that. That is really... I need to write that down somewhere.
Girl, I'll send it to you right now.
Do it, because that is good.
Yes.
But it's all... And it makes sense. Because to me, that is, we're talking about God in a way that actually, that makes sense to me. Because when people say stupid shit like, well, God is watching everything and God does blah, blah, blah. It's like, so I'm supposed to believe that God is sitting up there watching everything that everyone does and, ruling their lives and whatever. But at the same time, it's like all of the shit that happens, all the horrible things that happen, he's just like, well, I see it, but I'm not doing anything about it.
Right.
That doesn't make sense.
No, right?
Because you're malevolent. I love that. Mm-hmm. Because if you are able to stop it, but unwilling to,
yes,
that does make you malevolent.
Agreed.
I mean, if you could stop the evil that happens, but you're like, meh, let's let them do it, then you're not a good,
and I know this isn't our topic, but that's why I like older pantheons of gods, like specifically, like the cultists of ancient Greece, because their gods were not all powerful, all seeing, all everything, right?
No.
They all were fallible. They all had human qualities. So they did good, they did evil, they were loving and hateful,
But they were jealous, they were vain.
They did ugly things. Yeah. And it wasn't just like, I am, this person, like I am Zeus or whatever. But Zeus was still afraid of a god. Zeus was afraid of, like, Nyx, the goddess of night, because she controlled the darkness, right? And so he would never face her. Like, I think that makes way more sense to me than some god being like, well, I can do all and see all and be all, but I'm not going to. But I'm not gonna.
So what does God do?
Girl, who knows? Chills, gets his beard trimmed maybe, sacrifices some people. I don't fucking know.
Huh.
I don't know what your God does.
I don't know, girl.
He ain't my
I don't know. I don't care. I don't believe.
Hell no.
I believe in a thing called love.
Just.
Yeah. So listen. Enough of this God stuff.
I know.
Although that was really good. I love that.
Even though I could talk about this shit all day.
I know. But I would like to at least dip our toes in the topic of Black History Month.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I want to talk about, and I know you know about this, is the Green Book.
Okay.
There was a movie made a couple of years ago called The Green Book that was up for some Oscars and whatever, but that's not that is the topic, but it's not, I'm not talking about the movie. I'm talking about the actual Green Book, which was a book that was published from 1936 to 1964. It was like an annual guide, and it was the Negro Motorist Guide Book that was published, like I said, annually, but it was to help African Americans safely navigate the roads of a segregated country. So this book, this little green book, you would buy this book and it would say, okay, now that you can travel because cars are plentiful,
sure,
and jobs are plentiful, people want to go on vacation, but since you're not white, it's limited where you can go.
Yep.
So you can go, these are the places that you can go eat, that you can stay, that will serve you food, that will, whatever it is, that, gas stations, all the things, were in this book. And so every year they would publish this book, and obviously as things change, they would update them.
Yeah.
But what kind of got me, because I knew about this, but the fact that it was still being published in the 60s, it was being published in my lifetime.
Yep, right before Civil Rights Act.
Yeah. But it goes hand in hand with sundown towns, because people also, when they were traveling, and sundown or sunset towns or gray towns, all is the same thing, which is where towns where if you were not white, it was not safe to be there after the sun went down.
There's a good example of that in a show called Lovecraft Country on HBO. It's great. It's kind of spooky, spiritual, but it does deal with real issues of the Black community in, I think, the 50s, 60s. But yeah, there's a part where they are in a town that's a sundown town, and it's getting there, and they're all, let's haul ass, and they're stopped by this. It's all really uncomfortable. But yeah, that's a horrifying idea to me.
Well, and sundown towns, oddly enough, were were created that way through white municipalities where neighborhoods or entire cities and states would practice segregation by excluding, non-white folks with discrimination, local laws, intimidation, and violence. Mm-hmm. So they actually created laws, which, if you think about that for a second, lawmakers put things on the book saying, we don't want these people in our town after dark.
Yep.
It horrifies me. And it horrifies me that we have some of those same people today, serving in Congress.
Some of them who are
Marjorie Taylor Greene, Lauren Boebert,
that trash heap of a human.
They're all
honestly
all those people who are like. But of course, now they're pick for people to be like. We can actively say shit about them and not be run out of town. Are queer people.
Yep.
But still, given their choice, it would be anybody who's different from them.
Oh, 100%.
Any than their little whitewashed nonsense lives. Yeah. But the fact that these places existed up through the 60s. Now, what really shocks, so there's a map that you can, if you look up sundown towns, there's a map that you can access that tells you all of this, the location of all the sundown towns. Mm-hmm. I was surprised that the South was not the hottest hotspot for the sundown towns.
Yeah.
The biggest because the map is like a big white map with red dots where all the sundown towns are.
Yeah.
And so if it was hardly any, it was like a lighter shade, and then where it was really concentrated, it was blood red. The biggest places where it was were in the Midwest.
Interesting.
So like Wisconsin, Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Missouri. But there's also that little clip up the eastern seaboard from probably around New Jersey up to the tip top of Maine and the entire West Coast.
Of course.
And I was like, I knew the West Coast was fucked up. Yeah. I knew the West Coast had all the racist nonsense because, well, we've learned. We've done our homework. But Portland, Seattle.
Oh, yeah.
Los Angeles, San Diego, we're all sundown towns.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, God, that just, it makes me kind of sick.
Well, but we already know that history of
Portland. I didn't realize. Yeah, I knew Portland specifically was a mess.
And, Oregon was, the white haven.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Right, because there were actually laws on the books saying that you could not buy property here in Oregon unless you were white.
Mm-hmm. And they were on, the Oregon Constitution to, the 90s.
Yeah. How gross is that?
Yeah. And they voted recently to take off a form of punishment can be slavery in Oregon. That was last year during the vote or something. Yeah. Because that was still, again,
and
on
that
the
was
books.
Still on there just last year. How gross is that? But I guess through my own ignorance of this whole thing, I've known about sundown towns and I've known about the Green Book. I did not realize that Portland was a sundown town. Because we think of it being so liberal.
Now.
But it's also so white still. Yeah. And Seattle. Yeah. And Los Angeles.
I know. That one's a little different to me.
But it kind of goes inland in California a little bit, and then back to the coast when you get down to the southern part. But it was that is shocking.
Which it is interesting because there is such a concentration of brown people who live in Southern California and always have. So to create a town where they weren't welcome is so... Create counties and towns where they weren't welcome, it doesn't make any sense. It was Mexico for the longest time.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so that was just kind of mind-boggling to me.
Yeah.
But there is a documentary that is on Amazon Prime, and I'm sure you can see it other places. You can watch it on YouTube.
Yeah.
But it was made by Smithsonian, and it's called The Green Book, Guide to Freedom.
Okay.
And the whole thing really started because around this time, as I mentioned, people were becoming more able to travel.
Yeah.
Because common people like us, were able to buy cars.
Yeah.
Were able to get away, get little vacations from their work. And most people couldn't afford, big vacations, to go to other countries.
Yeah,
and that wasn't still quite a thing yet, like it is now. But people could afford to, go for the weekend and go, whatever. But if you were black... You had to know where you could go, and how you drove, what route you drove, because you'd have to get food, you'd have to get gas, and I know a lot of people got into the habits, of course, of like packing their car up full of food and the things you would do so that they wouldn't have to stop. Because unlike, white people, it was not safe for them to stop.
Right, of course.
And even in the places where it said on their green book, it said you could go, even some of those places, it was still sketchy to be there like after dark. And I was having a conversation with my mother this morning, and those of you who've listened know that my mother has dementia, but some of the stuff from her youth she can still, she'll just tell stories about. And one of the stories, and because I've been hearing this particular story since I was a kid, is her first husband was from Hattiesburg, Mississippi anyway. And she was 17 when she met and married him. And then he decided to take her to Mississippi.
Wolf.
So imagine going to Mississippi in 1958.
No.
Why? Who? No.
What, where?
You. What, where?
When?
No.
How?
Just no.
Yeah, no.
Just no. So he took this 17-year-old girl who'd never really been anywhere but here in Montana to Mississippi. Though, because the racism here was it was here, but it was much more subtle.
Right, because Grandma always used to tell me, well, I don't ever remember seeing racism growing up here. And I said, ¿por qué? Like, what? How? Where? Like, how did you not? But
then to go to Mississippi where they're like...
It's blatant.
Where, they have signs. But she had told me the story of her then husband driving down the road and some black man was hitchhiking. And he became instantly furious because how on earth could that man have the nerve to be on this highway with his thumb out? And he wanted to stop the car and beat the shit out of this guy for even just existing. Because he had the nerve to try and hitch a ride this out of town on this main road. It was like, so the only crime this man has committed was being black in Mississippi in the 50s.
Yep.
And she was told the stories about, like walking down the street.
This is the story that I know.
And having the black people get off the sidewalk and walk in the street. Or her, going to take a drink from a fountain and her husband practically snatching her up by her hair because she was going to drink out of the colored fountain.
Well, and the one specifically that I remember is her walking on the street and old white men say something because a black man is walking towards her or a black person is walking towards her. And they're talking amongst themselves saying, well, he better get off the sidewalk, whatever. And Grandma said something to them. And I don't remember what it was, but they said something to, like, if you know what's good for you, you'll keep your mouth shut, about her trying to be, like, defensive over this black man. And I couldn't imagine being 17 years old and never experiencing that kind of world, and then coming here.
That level of blatant racism.
Yeah. Well, because here no one ever thought, like, the racism that happened here was racist, right? It's like what people say now. A lot of times, like, well, I'm not racist. I don't see color or bullshit like that. Yeah.
I'm not racist. I have a black friend. Wow.
Well, and here's the thing. People, if you have a black friend or you're married to a black man or a black woman, here's a cute thing, that you can't fuck your way out of racism. Do you know what I'm saying?
Wow.
It's accurate. Girl, just because you married someone who has more melanin than you doesn't mean that you're not racist.
It doesn't?
Not really.
No. Huh.
Uh-huh. Anyway.
So, never mind. I was going to go somewhere really trashy right then.
Oh, shocking.
But since I'm a good,
Christian woman,
I can't possibly say that I, tried to fuck my way out of racism. I won't say that because that's tacky.
You won't say that.
I won't say that because
you'll just dance around it.
Right, I will not say anything like that because that's just trashy. It's true, but it's trashy. Well, what's funny to me about kind of racism, and because racism is hilarious. Is I think that most people who are racist have no idea that they're racist.
Agreed.
Because they don't think the things that they say or do are racist. And I know that I still have so much work to do for myself. Because I will say or do something that I had no idea was problematic.
Right.
Because it's not obvious. It's not blatant. It's not, these people kind of stuff. It's not that kind of crap. It's like just what I think maybe even it's a common phrase.
Oh, and I have one for you that I just learned.
Okay.
Okay, so you know that, and this is like common within communities of color, specifically the Black community. Like when they think something is very funny, they'll like run away really quick and come back. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
And so the term barrel of laughs comes from racist terminology because back during, antebellum, there was, obviously Black people weren't allowed to have like joy or happiness or, a life outside of slavery. And so when there was something that was funny, they would put their head in a barrel to laugh so it was out of earshot of like white slavers.
Wow.
Yeah. And so barrel of laughs is technically a racist term. And I didn't know. And obviously we don't use it in that way now.
No.
But yeah, it's very interesting. Same thing as like grandfathered in, right?
And I've learned so many phrases that were either racist or problematic or whatever that we of course wouldn't know because they've become so far removed from their original meaning.
Right.
Yeah. And I was like, okay. Because I remember one of the phrases I used that I didn't think was problematic was referring to someone as the low man on the totem pole. Because I thought it literally meant, like, here's a totem pole, and it's this guy down here at the bottom. Because usually there's faces.
Yeah.
And it just means that you are at the bottom, whatever. And it usually is referred to as, like, you just started a job, so there's people with seniority over you.
Sure.
But, yeah. It's problematic because you're referring, first of all, to a culture that you probably know nothing about. And it's not your culture.
Well, and the best part is, to me, is how frequent that is used within the United States for sure. And the indigenous tribes that used totem poles were very few.
Yes.
It wasn't like all indigenous, because indigenous people are not a monolith, but it's not that all indigenous people use totem poles. It's the same thing with like war bonnets, like feathered bonnets.
Yeah.
Not all indigenous people did that. Like, you're just picking and choosing parts of indigeneity.
So what you're saying is that all indigenous people aren't exactly the same?
Right. To me, it's an example of going to like Northern Europe. You're not going to say that like Norway is the same as Germany is the same as France. You wouldn't do that because I would too, but they're distinct countries.
They're all white people.
They're all white people with distinct countries though, and cultures and like languages. And so it is interesting that when that translates to the United States, we don't see that. It's the same thing with Asia. In the United States, people be like, oh, they're Asian. Okay, well, bitch, Asia's fucking huge. Like, what do you mean?
So here's my stupidity about that. It wasn't that long ago, and by not that long ago, I mean probably in the last 5 years, that it sunk into my fat head that people from India are Asian.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, right, because we just refer to them as Indian, because they're from India.
Yep.
But we also refer to indigenous people as Indians. But that's a whole other story.
Yeah.
But I was watching something, and they referred to this man from India as being, southwest Asian. I was like, oh, duh.
Well,
and it was really just a duh moment, like, oh my God, of course they are. Well, and it hadn't occurred to me.
All the countries, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Iran, all of those countries are the Middle East. What do Westerners consider the East but Asia? And so people who live in the area don't consider themselves Middle Eastern. That's just a very Western perspective because it's between us and Asia. So all of those countries are just Western Asia.
Right.
And people don't know that. They're like, no, it's the Middle East. I'm like, to us, to you, but not to people who live there, not to people in Asia, not to people in Europe.
Right.
Like, it's very different.
Yeah. All right. So a couple other things I wanted to throw in there before we run out of time because we're like there.
Oh my God.
Documentaries.
Okay.
So 13th. It is such a good documentary. It's about the 13th Amendment. Ava DuVernay, who I adore. Directed this, and if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix. I Am Not Your Negro.
Oh,
the story of James Baldwin.
He was amazing.
John Lewis, Good Trouble. John Lewis was representative in Congress, but it's kind of the story of his life. The Black Godfather.
Okay.
And the last one I want to talk about, because there's a lot. This is just a little handful. Like, you also probably want to watch, I think it's called Homecoming.
Okay.
The Beyonce.
Yeah.
And I'm sure some of you have heard of Beyonce.
Who?
Yeah. I know. She's a singer girl.
Beyonce?
She's this singer girl who's like made a couple dollars. And
just once or twice.
One or two songs.
Yeah.
But the one that struck me because it just seems odd is called The Black Power Mixtape.
Okay.
1967 and 1975. And it is the evolution of Black Power, and here's where it takes an odd twist, as viewed through Swedish journalists and filmmakers.
Interesting.
I was like, wait, what?
Well, yeah.
Because it's actually this particular documentary was directed by a Swedish filmmaker, but is specifically how this part of the world was looking at our country and the Black Revolution that was happening.
Yeah, okay.
And I was like, huh.
Yeah.
Interesting. I haven't seen it yet. I just heard of it today.
Yeah.
I just read about it this morning for the first time.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'm going to have to find that. But also I'm going to watch, before I see you next week, I'm going to watch, like I won't see you tomorrow or the next day. Before we do this next week, I'm going to watch the documentary on the Green Book because it just looks fascinating. And I know a little bit. I mean, I know obviously what we talked about today, but I really want to learn more.
Yeah.
And of course, knowledge is power.
Yes, girl. And for me, I'm going to tell you this is more not necessarily fun, but go watch Wakanda Forever, the new Black Panther movie. It is phenomenal. I would follow Angela Bassett to the end of the goddamn earth.
Okay, so I'm just going to say this about that. Angela Bassett, goddess.
Oh, I think she
First of all, she is one of the most beautiful women ever.
Yep.
So when I watched the first Black Panther movie, I've loved Angela Bassett since day one.
Yep.
And I'm watching her in that going, beautiful, gorgeous. When she took off her head wrap and all that white hair, I was like, how is she even more gorgeous with white hair?
Her. Yeah, right.
She's so gorgeous.
Yes.
But she's such a great actress.
Yeah, agreed.
First of all, totally robbed for What's Love Got to Do with It. Should have won an Oscar for that.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yep. Also, I would say it's Black History Month, bitch. So go look up things. Go look up the Black Panthers. And don't look at just the photo op people, fists in the air with afros and, go look at what the women and children and people were doing to raise awareness, to help the community, to feed children and educate children.
Right.
It wasn't about just being a militia. No. It wasn't just that.
But look up Angela Davis.
Yeah.
Angela Davis is an amazing woman. Still around, by the way. Still trying to change the world.
Yep.
But people, I think, see the image of Angela Davis from the late 60s, early with the big afro and the fist in the air, like you were just mentioning. And that's kind of where they leave that.
That's the end.
She has continued. She's still, like I said, still around, still doing things. So look up some people.
Yeah, and if you're going to read poetry, read Black poets. If you're going to order food, order from Black businesses. If you're going to buy something, buy from Black businesses. Granted, you should do this all year, but do it more so now. Support Black folk and all they do. And the last thing, I know we talked about intergenerational trauma and grief, but there is also, your ancestors didn't just give you grief or trauma. They also give you strength and joy. And so Black folk and people who are marginalized have resilience and see beauty and know truth in moments where most people would just lay down and die. Yeah. So I think being Black isn't just a tragedy.
No.
Black is joyful and magic. And so
it makes me think about when I saw this interview with Liza Minnelli and Lorna Luft, how people always refer to their mom as this sad, tragic character. And they were like, that's not who our mom was. Yes, she died young. And yes, terrible things happened, but she was this joyous character. Yeah. And so people think of the Black community like, oh, slavery, this tragedy. Well, it's like
Jim Crow, segregation.
But there was so much joy.
So much.
Which was created. They weren't handed joy. Joy had to be created.
They had to find that joy within themselves through resilience and strength.
And on that note, I want to say there's a couple things out there that if you want to be more experienced in some fun Black culture things, go on Netflix and watch Michelle Buteau, Utopia.
Okay.
You will die laughing.
Okay,
She's brilliant and hilarious.
I love that.
Two Dope Queens on HBO. Phoebe Robinson, and I'm blanking on Jessica Williams, I think.
Maybe.
But Two Dope Queens, hilarious.
Love it.
And they feature comedians on each of theirs. So I think there's like 8 specials.
Yep.
Fantastic. But also Phoebe Robinson, who is the one of the Two Dope Queens, has written 3 books, all of which I have, which I highly recommend.
Yeah.
And they're all hilarious, but they're also her life. So you can also just, if you don't want to watch a serious documentary, which you still should to learn some stuff, watch something fun.
Yeah. Just support Black
Black
business.
art.
Support Black people. Full stop.
Yeah. And tonight, as I mentioned, which by the time you hear this, it will be yesterday, going to support my friend
Auntie Maria.
Maria Webster, who is publishing her first full novel, Consecrated Ground. Under the pen name Virginia Black. I know we talked about it last week, but I'll be going tonight to the thing where she will be signing autographs and showing little clips of things and doing a reading.
I love it.
And I'm so excited because I love her. First of all, I've known her for ever. Well, and I know we're like way over time. Who cares? I always try to think like, how long have I known you? And I told her, I was like, I met you when your eldest child was 1.
Damn.
And she's now, I think, 30.
Holy shit.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, support Black art, support Black do everything and learn some stuff.
That's it.
Google.
All right,
is your friend.
We're done.
We are done because we kind of raced through what we needed to talk about, and we will be back next week. And if you want to hear anything, or you want to just message us, you want to talk to us, you want to just tell us how much you love us or hate us, we don't care. Either way is fine.
Yep.
It would seem as though at gmail.com, and we're here every week.
Yep. All right, bye. It's been real.
Bye. Wait.
Oh my god.
Well, my mouse wasn't working.
Everything's ruined.
Gotta
start over.
Okay, bye. God, we have to start the whole show over?
No, bitch, that's too much.
Oh, just the goodbyes?
Yeah.
Bye. What the hell? Why is it...
It would seem as though...